Welcome to the online module on Introduction to Outcome Harvesting. This is a video series with 3 parts, each going over different parts of the outcome harvesting process. This module is also available in French and Arabic. In this online module, we will introduce an adapted version of the outcome harvesting process. This approach is developed for monitoring purposes and used in NLNO program monitoring, but it can also be used as an evaluation methodology. Let's go over the outline of this online module. In this first part of the module, we will familiarize ourselves with the basics of outcome harvesting. What is outcome harvesting? When and why do we use it? We will get a snapshot of the key steps of the process and discuss some of its strengths and limitations. In the second video, we will go over the first steps of outcome harvesting, collecting and reviewing signs of change and developing outcome descriptions. In the third video, we will discuss the final steps of the process: substantiation, analysis and interpretation, and learning and adaptive planning. In this video series, we introduce an adapted version of outcome harvesting. It builds on the original methodology, but the process is adapted for alliances. Outcome harvesting is a participatory monitoring, evaluation, and learning approach that determines whether and how an intervention has contributed to change by collecting, or harvesting, evidence of what has changed, outcomes. The method was inspired by the definition of an outcome as a change in the behavior, relationships, actions, activities, policies, or practices of an individual, group, community, organization, or institution. We tend to develop results chains when change is linear and predicted. However, changes in attitude and behavior are not necessarily linear. That is why outcome harvesting is interesting. It helps to identify instances of change that have happened after program implementation has started. Outcome harvesting does not measure progress towards predetermined outcomes, but it works backwards. It collects evidence of what has been achieved, looking back to determine whether and how the project or intervention contributed to the change. Then we can link the identified activities to outcomes and result areas. So, outcome harvesting helps to make sense of observed changes in the behaviors of social actors and our context, and to assess our contribution to those changes. This contribution can be indirect or direct, partial or whole, intended or unintended, positive or negative. It is a participatory method because many stakeholders are involved in the process of developing and designing the outcomes descriptions. We will get to what an outcomes description is in the next video. The participatory approach fosters ownership of the findings. For example, it can encourage insightful discussions because of the diverse perspectives that participants bring to the table. These discussions are not about finding the right answer, but rather to understand the cause of change in its complexity. Therefore, outcome harvesting is also designed to support learning about achievements. Outcome harvesting has proven to be particularly useful in unpredictable and complex situations, which is often the case in the development and social sector. In cases where cause and effect relationships are poorly understood, such as which intervention led to increased awareness about harmful practices. When the intervention is implemented in dynamic contexts. In situations where it is not possible to concretely define most of what an intervention achieves, or even what specific actions will be taken over a multi-year period. For example, achieving social norm change to facilitate a gender transformative society. When outcomes are not sufficiently specific or measurable at the time of planning an intervention. In multi-country advocacy programs, we mostly work with different angles and goals to achieve the impact we determined in the beginning, but the strategies employed are quite different. Basically, outcome harvesting aims to understand the process of change and clarifies the relationship between activity, output, and actual outcome of interventions. We will go into the exact difference between outputs and outcomes in a bit. The emphasis is on effectiveness rather than efficiency or performance. The method facilitates conversations about which strategies are working most effectively and which are not, or to a lesser extent. Before the process starts, the team should decide on the following questions. First, what do you want to know? Here you define your evaluation or learning questions. For example, you want to know how effective the different activities have been. Second, who is the harvest user? Or in other words, who wants to know this? Is it management, donors, women in the community? Third, what will they do with this information? Will they focus on reporting, on learning, adapting? Finally, who is the harvester? In other words, who will harvest the outcomes? Internal MEL staff or external? There are 5 steps in this adapted version of outcome harvesting. They are guiding principles rather than rigid formula to follow. There are no fixed periods on when they should take place. These timings are suggestions and should be discussed with your country teams. Step 1, collecting signs of change. This happens all year round. Step 2, joint review of signs of change and draft outcome descriptions. This happens at least twice a year and informs review of past implementation as well as planning of future activities. Step 3, engage informants and conduct substantiation. This happens at least annually. Step 4, analysis and interpretation of the harvested information. This happens at least twice a year and informs the annual planning and reporting processes. Step 5, use results for learning and adaptive planning. This can happen at all times, specifically during the annual planning meetings. We will go into the details of these different steps in the second and third videos. As discussed, outcome harvesting focuses on the outcomes and our contribution to these outcomes. But what do we actually mean by this? Outcome harvesting defines outcome as a change in the behavior, relationships, actions, activities, policies, or practices of a societal actor, such as an individual, group, community, organization, or institution, with whom a program or project works directly. It is an observable and significant change that has been achieved and that has been influenced by the intervention. So, we look for changes in the behaviors of societal actors, including leaders, organizations, institutions, and groups or communities. The types of change we look for include newly made commitments, actions, and policies, legislations, and investments. In outcome harvesting, it is important for us to differentiate between outputs and outcomes. But what exactly is the difference? An output is the immediate product of project interventions. It is a result of the program activities implemented. Outputs are in your sphere of control. They are typically tangible and easy to measure, but not the reason why the project was necessary. They are a means to achieve your outcome. Outputs are preconditions for lower-level outcomes. An output is, for example, the number of girl leadership trainings followed by targeted teachers. An outcome, on the other hand, is what we want to achieve. An outcome is not an action, but rather a state of being. It is a macro-level goal and a long-term change. It is not in your sphere of control, but in your sphere of influence. We are not the only ones doing the influencing, but there are other actors who are contributing too. Outcomes are the measurable results that you hope to see after you have finished your outputs. They are the changes that are expected to occur when all necessary and sufficient preconditions are met. Lower-level outcomes are preconditions for higher-level outcomes. An outcome can thus, for example, be transformed gender norms, or be that teachers publicly support girls and young women as leaders. While outcome harvesting can be a useful monitoring and evaluation method, it is important to be aware of both its strengths and limitations. This way, one can reap the best benefits from it. So what are the strengths? Outcome harvesting focuses on all signs of change, good or bad, planned or unplanned, intended or unintended, positive or negative, large or small, and so on. It uses an accessible approach that makes it easy to engage informants. It employs various means to collect data: face-to-face interviews, workshops, communication across distances, such as surveys, telephone video calls, emails, and written documentation. It has verifiable harvested outcomes. Let's now go over the method's limitations. Skill and time are required to identify and formulate high-quality outcome descriptions. Only those outcomes that the informant is aware of are captured. Starting with the outcomes and working backward represents a new way of thinking about change for some participants. Participation of those who influenced the outcomes to be harvested is crucial. Now that we have covered the basics of outcome harvesting, we will dive deeper into the different steps of the method in the next two videos.